the voice of Egypt.
It's 4 o'clock in Radio Cairo. This is World of Info. We're here live from Studio 3, coming live from the capital of Egypt, Radio Cairo. And my name is Dr. Amr MABROUK. Dua Muhammad is at the control. Our direct line number is 257-89407. And at the controls is Dua Muhammad. And today is the world of books. And you know the rule of the game. Every time or every month we present an episode that is dedicated to the books that I have read during the last months. And today we are presenting 4 books, 1 book for every week. And definitely books are interesting books. The rule of the game is, should we read the book, skim it or toss it? And my habit is that if the book doesn't deserve to be read, we shouldn't waste time in reading it. So every book that I present has been read from page 1 till the last page, and every book of them deserves to be read. And today the 4 books of today are the following books. 2 books by the same author, Mustafa Abeid, Against History. And the second book is The Footnotes of History from the Forgotten Files of Egypt. And the second book is by Izzat al-Qamhawi, and The Bushes in the Joy and Happiness, or Al-Aik fi al-Mabahig wal-Ahzan. And Zainab Abdullah, In the Homes of the Loved Ones, the children opening the secret box of their parents. And the 3 books are really interesting books. I would like to call them, shall we say, late winter readings, the type of books that you would like to sneeze in bed, and just before you sleep you read some pages and you find yourself indulged in some trips of interest, and some joy and some happiness, and also some facts that you might think are true, and I'm going to tell that they are not. So stay tuned with us in the world of info. Today is the world of books. So yes, My Way by Frank Sinatra. So what should we talk about? Books in the world of books. So let's start right away by the book of In the Houses or in the Homes of the Loved Ones, the sons or the children opening of their secret boxes of their family. This is a very interesting book by Zainab Abdullah. It brings a lot of nostalgia to the world of art, and it talks through the author who made documented interviews with the children who are now adults or very old adults, as if we may use the expression, of famous artists in Egypt. And through these interviews we will hear some stories of people who have formed our background in the field of art, and who have taken a great part of our lives, as we mentioned, as we have seen them going through the black and white movies and the times that we have spent. So definitely to read about these famous artists is reading about somebody or some people who are really very important in our lives. And so she has decided to write about these famous people. And the first of them was Sheikh Muhammad Rifat. Sheikh Muhammad Rifat is one of the greatest people or sheikhs who have recited Quran. Once Sheikh Sharawi said that the best voice of Quran that you can hear a man reciting and giving his own words, the words of the Quran in beautiful said and intensifying every word and delivering every meaning that you want to feel, and you are really become so much emotionally involved with every word of his, is Sheikh Muhammad Rifat. And for me, the Sheikh Muhammad Rifat is the voice that we hear always in Ramadan at the time of the sunset prayers, As we hear his beautiful voice going through the Radio Cairo, we'd always start our eating and our drinking after a long day fast. It brings joy and happiness to the people who hear Sheikh Muhammad Rifat, a man who has lived in the hearts of the Egyptians, or shall I say of the Arabs, or shall I say of the whole Muslim world, as they hear his voice. Our only bad luck is that he lived in the early 20th century, stopped reciting Quran by the 1939 or early 40s, and therefore before the great advance in the recording of the voice. And we owe the presence of the voice of Muhammad Rifat to Yahya Basha Mahran, who was a very famous Basha who lived in Upper Egypt, and he was a very rich man, and he was able to buy a very high advanced recorder at that time, and he was recording from the radio of Egypt the different verses of the Quran that were recited on daily basis and sometimes on weekly basis from Sheikh Muhammad Rifat. His voice is full of everything that you want to hear in Quran. And the modest way that he lived, the fact that he was blind, and the fact that he enjoyed his life as a in the reciting of Quran, makes him very special to our hearts. How he was able to pronounce every letter and every word in such dignified way, and at the same time made people who didn't even understand Arabic to fall in love with the way he was reciting Quran. And one day it was very well known that a British officer came to the radio of Egypt, Radio Cairo, and asked them, "I would love to see this gentleman as he is reciting the Quran." And so when he went and he was allowed into the studio and saw him for the first time and found out that he was blind, he said to them, "No wonder. This man is concentrating all his mind and mental faculties in understanding the words of the Quran, of the Holy Quran, and delivering them, every letter and every sentence, with the full meaning of it." Of course, Sheikh Muhammad Rifat was not really important for us to hear a testimony from a British listener. But what's important is that this gentleman who didn't really understand Arabic was able to understand the emotion and the sense of gratitude that we feel when we hear Sheikh Muhammad Rifat. Sheikh Muhammad Rifat lived in a very dignified life, and he refused to make the Quran source of income for him. He died in poverty, and yet he was never complaining of this poverty, and he suffered his last years from illness that unfortunately had stopped him and affected his larynx and his vocal folds, but yet he stays up till now in the hearts and the minds of Egyptians and of the whole world. And every day from 7 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. from the Quran radio station, from Radio Egypt, you can listen to a half hour full of joy, happiness, and fulfillment and satisfaction when you hear the voice of Muhammad Rifat going through the beautiful mornings in Egypt. And definitely this will help you to have a beautiful day full of hope and sense of gratitude that we are alive and we are listening to Muhammad Rifat. Zainab Abdullah has met the grandchildren of the Prophet of Sheikh Muhammad Rifat, and they told us part of his story, and I believe that this was a very good start for such a book. As we go through the pages of this book about in the house or in the homes of the people that we love, we can meet Badia Khairi, the man who has written the beautiful poetry and the beautiful poem of Umya Masri, and his son Adil Khairi, who was a very famous and short-lived comic actor Abdel Fattah al-Qusari, the famous actor who really owned our hearts and unfortunately put us into a lot of grief as we have seen and heard about his suffering in his final years. Ahmad Hamdi, the great actor of Egypt, and Muhammad Abdul Muttalib, the famous singer, who is always part of our day in Ramadan by his famous song, and we definitely, which is called Ramadan Ghana, and we definitely feel amused when we hear the story of Ramadan Ghana, that at the times of recessions in the early 1940s, and Muhammad Abdul Muttalib, or the famous singers who could have a license to sing, could pass by the radio building and search for lyrics to sing. And one of the songs that a lot of people refused to take was Ramadan Ghana. And so Abdul Muttalib bought it for 6 Egyptian pounds. And he brought a beautiful composer, and they composed the song, the lyrics, the beautiful lyrics of the music, and the incredible voice of Muhammad Abdul Muttalib, with all the feelings that will always bring to every Egyptian the nostalgia that Ramadan has come, and Muhammad Abdul Muttalib is still singing in the radio. So when we talk about these famous people like Zinat Sidqi or Aqila Ratib, Muhammad Rida, Abdul Manaam Madbouli, and Tawfiq al-Dign and Fuad al-Muhandis, all of these people have formed the set and the mind and the background of Egyptians up till today. But maybe the great and the most important secret of them all is Sheikh Sayyid al-Naqshbandi, the famous Sheikh who had an incredible voice, a voice that was definitely from heaven, and the man who used to recite some beautiful poems just before the Fajr prayers or the dawn prayers in the mosques of Ahmad al-Badawi or in the mosques of al-Hussein. When you hear Sayyid al-Naqshbandi and you hear and you feel the voices that he was producing, you feel very much unified with the emotions that he carried with him. And I believe, why is that? Because definitely Sayyid al-Naqshbandi was an honest man who carried in himself a beautiful pious heart, and who has decided to give as an endowment his mind, his heart, and his whole setup for reciting these beautiful verses. And his meeting with Baligh Hamdi, the famous Egyptian composer, and writing these beautiful lyrics and composing these lyrics, which plays every day in Ramadan and every day in holy months, which is, for example, Mawlai inni waqaftu bibabik, or God, I stood by your door begging for forgiveness. When you hear that words, definitely you'll get tears into your eyes, because this man was honest. He was delivering all his emotions from heart to heart. Reading a book of nostalgia in the homes of the beloved ones by Zainab Abdullah will bring a lot of nostalgia to your mind and to your heart and to your soul. Thank you, Mrs. Zainab, for a beautiful book that tells us all about the secrets of the people who have taken great important part in our lives, how they lived simple life and how they affected our lives forever. Definitely they were talented artists, and they were parts of our hearts, and they still will be for years to come. You're still listening to The World of Info, and today is The World of Books, coming live from Studio 3. Stay tuned with us. You're still listening to The World of Info. Today is The World of Books. My name is Dr. Amr MABROuk. Dua Muhammad is at the control. We're coming live from Studio 3. Our direct line number is 257-89407. And our second book of today is the book by Mustafa Abeid, Against History, or how to clarify the lies and the delusions of history. Well, this is an interesting topic and an interesting title for a book. Mustafa Abeid is a very famous writer, and he is the director or the editor of Al-Wafd, which is the newspaper of the Al-Wafd party. And definitely it's interesting to read this book because he is giving us an idea about what are the wrong information that we have about some people in the Egyptian history, and how that these lies, as he thinks and he believes, have definitely led us to wrong information about these people. And to tell you the truth, I am convinced by some of these chapters and I'm totally against them. So let's start with one of the most important chapters, with Mustafa Kemal was not a real popular leader of Egypt. Well, I beg to differ with Mustafa Abid. Mustafa Kemal is one of the greatest nationalists of Egypt. Mustafa Abid thinks that he does not deserve this title and he does not deserve to be an important leader of the history of Egypt, because he was caring and giving his complete loyalty to the Khedive, that's Abbas Hilmi II, and also to the Sultan. And so he was not asking for independence of Egypt. And therefore he shouldn't be given the title of the great leader. And he thinks that his name has been polished after the revolution to be antagonist to the name of Saad Zaghloul and Mustafa Nahas. This is his point of view. And for me, Mustafa Kemal is a great man. He's not just a humble, as some people say, a humble vagabond in redingote. No. He was a man of substance, a man who died at the age of 34, and yet reached maturity very fast. When you see Mustafa Kemal during his early years, when he studied law in France, when he thought that France is the country that's going to help Egypt, until the Fashuda incident, until what happened in the treaty between Britain and France in dividing the influence of between France and Britain, the imperial influence in the Middle East, he found out that France is not the country to go towards. His belief that Khedive Abbas Hilmi II is the one who will be able, if we stand by his side, to push aside the British and kick them out of Egypt. And then when he found that Khedive Abbas Hilmi was not the man, not the caliber, and not the man who's the owner of his own fate, then we should go to the Sultan, who was the Sultan of Turkey, or of the Ottoman Empire, which at that time was, as they called Turkey or Ottoman Empire, the ill man or the sick man of Europe. So by 1904, at the age of 30 years, Mustafa Kemal has reached the full maturity and has gone through the whole circle and found out that the only way for Egypt to get its own independence and for Egypt to fight the British depends on the shoulders of the Egyptians. To reach such maturity at the age of 30 years is something to really respect. And also, when you say that Saad Zaghloul was better, yes, definitely Saad Zaghloul was a great leader, a revolutionary man, an honest man, a man of substance, a man of great important part and role in Egypt, a man who is even related to the distant relative of my family itself. So when I'm talking about Saad Zaghloul, I have to talk about him in great respect. But definitely Saad Zaghloul had also his fallacies. And at the time of Mustafa Kemal active lives and active times in life, Saad Zaghloul was totally neutral during these times. He was part of the regime after his role in Arabi's revolution and being saved by his father-in-law, Mustafa Pasha Fahmi, who was a great politician, but he was also the longest time surviving prime minister in the history of Egypt. And he was totally obedient to Cromer and to Khedive Abbas Hilmi. So when we talk about Saad Zaghloul in his contemporary years with Mustafa Kemal, we have to talk about him in cautious way. We have to talk also about Saad Zaghloul, the great man in the 1919 revolution, who is a different character than Saad Zaghloul of the early 20th century. So, with all due respect to Mustafa Abid, Mustafa Kemal was a great leader of Egypt. The second chapter was that I really beg to differ about, or some of the wrong information that has written in it, which is about the Egyptian Jews. We have studied and we have mentioned the Egyptian Jewish community, and we do really respect the Jewish religion, and we respect a lot of Egyptian Jews. But we also respect that the information which is given should be given in the right way. So when, for example, we talk about Henry Corel as an Egyptian, he was not. He was the one of the founders of Hadithu, and which is the Egyptian الحركة الديمقراطية للتطور or تحرير الوطني, and this is one of the first communist party in Egypt. But he was not Egyptian, and he was not carrying the Egyptian nationality, and he was having an Italian passport, and he was forced to leave Egypt during the king's time, not during the Egyptian revolution time. And since he was Egyptian, was not Egyptian, it was very easy for him to be removed from Egypt and denied a permit to stay. So when Mustafa Abid tells that he was an Egyptian and his Egyptian passport has been confiscated, well, this is the wrong information. When talking about Ismail Sadqi, we definitely respect his point of view that Ismail Sadqi was a great politician. Then, as we go through the rest of the chapters of the book, we have to talk also about Sayyid Qutb, about Muhammad Naguib, and about Salah Salim, and Abdul Halim Hafiz. I don't very much have a lot of differences, in my opinion, between the opinion of Mustafa Abid and his opinion in these people. And definitely, when we talk about the Black Book to the White Man, or the Black Book which was written by Amr MABROUK against Mustafa Nahas, I totally agree that Mustafa Nahas was one of the greatest leaders of Egypt, a man of great intellect, a man of integrity, a man who was a patriot with full beliefs in Egypt and Egyptians, a man who has been always a great democrat, and a man who was denied some chances of success, but yet he is there to live in the hearts of Egyptians. So thank you, Mr. Mustafa Abid, for such an interesting book against history. Some of the facts are not facts. Some of his opinions, I bet to differ with them. But the fact that you are trying to go through different pages of Egyptian history and to liberate us from fixed taboos should be respected. So, after the break, another book. You're still listening to the World of Info, and today is the World of Books. The third book of today is by Izzat al-Qamhawi, The Bushes in Joy and Sadness. Well, it's a very strange title of the book because it's called Al-Ayk fi al-Mabahig wal-Ahzan. Originally, this is the name of a book talking about one of the old books of the Arabic history, and it deals with a lot of things that might not be appropriate to bring on radio. But Izzat al-Qamhawi didn't take it from this side. Izzat al-Qamhawi is a very talented writer, and he is very well informed. He has his own plays and books of his own, and he is a very good journalist who has publishes regularly in famous newspapers like Sharq al-Awsat, and some of his books have reached the short list of Sheikh Zayed books clubs, and of course we should talk about him, and we have presented one of his books before. So when we talk about the way that he's writing his books, definitely he has a very good prose. And this book in particular has not been, it's a renovation of one of his old books that were published in early 2000s, in late 90s. And he has decided to talk about different points of interest, bringing along some real interesting information. For example, he would talk about fingers. And this is interesting, how the fingers are important for the young or the infants, and how they are very busy with licking their fingers. How the fingers are very important for using them for playing the tone or playing music. How it is very important to understand the characters of the others through their fingers. How a real pianist has to have very special fingers. Although this is the idea about a piano player, I was in the opera maybe 3 or 4 years back, and I had the pleasure and honor of seeing one of the greatest pianists in Egypt, who was playing beautiful Beethoven Concerto of the piano, which is one of the very difficult concertos to be played. And he himself, having a short stature, didn't have these charming pinpointed fingers that we think that all pianists could have. But he has presented a concerto of Beethoven as much as it should be. And he is teaching and giving lectures as the professor of piano in Chicago University. So the fingers are important, and to talk about fingers, how they are used, sometimes for delivering a message of threat, and also sometimes else for delivering a message of hope, and a message of happiness, and a message of saying that everything is okay. As we go through the pages of the book, we'll find that he has been clarifying or dividing these sense and sensibility. For example, the voice. How the voice is very important, and the tone of the voice is very important for us to understand when we look at how to understand the method that these people are delivering. And definitely talking about places and about balconies and about going through history is definitely interesting to read. So he has used the same titles of the old book of the Ike in different methods and more modern abbreviations, and at the same time when he tells us about the place and the times and the fingers and the voice and the notes and the tones, he will definitely give us more sense and sensibility of how we should understand joy and happiness. How can joy and happiness be brought to our minds through different things that can be of sense, of taste, and of touch. So the bushes in joy and happiness and sadness is definitely a book, a philosophical book by Aizat al-Qamhawi, in trying to deal how we can reach the climax of joy and get away from the depression of sadness. So this will be the third book in our crowded books club or books of today in the world of books. Stay tuned with us for the fourth book of today. Jimmy Cliff, and I can see clearly now. I think this song has been sung by maybe hundreds of singers, and every time it brings a lot of nostalgia and a lot of happiness, because I can see now and I can see clearly now. So the third book in the world of books of today, with the world of info, is by another book by Mustafa Abed, and these are the footnotes of history from the Egypt Forgotten Files. Well, this is another interesting book of Mustafa Abed. He likes to deal very much in history, and he has graduated from the Faculty of Archaeology at Cairo University from the Islamic section and Islamic Archaeology, and he has 14 different books. And so when he writes another book of history, definitely I would like to read it and to find a lot of interesting notes, and I also bet to differ in some of these points of views. So let's talk about this book in particular. In the first of all, the first chapter was talking about Police of Egypt. patriots and killers. Yes, I agree with him, and I agree that when writing a book about Egyptian police, you have to mention that there were a lot of nationalists who really served in Egypt in Egyptian police. We can never forget the officers or the police officers who shared in the 1919 revolution. And we will never forget the Egyptian police officers who stood guard on Ismailia in 1952, in January 1952, defending the premises of the security main station in Ismailia, which has been attacked and bombarded by the British tanks, and they received the order from Fuad Sirajuddin Pasha, the Minister of Interior, and to defend for the last bullet and the last man, and this is what they have done. So yes, Egyptian policemen and the police force of Egypt has seen a lot of heroes, and these heroes who were involved in fighting crime all over through the history of Egypt, we cannot deny their role in defending Egypt from the dangers of crime and also from the dangers of drugs, and their patriotic role during 1967 and 1973 war and in 1956 war. So, real gratitude for the Egyptian police. Then he will write, for example, about the law of the other footnotes of history. For example, Hamza Bassiouni, who was a commander of the military jail in the 60s, where there are a lot of people who has faced very bad times in these jails. But also we can talk about something which is very important. How he himself, the writer, has taken us through different pages of Egyptian history. He was talking, for example, of how Tawfiq al-Hakim was considered to be a great miser. Well, this is a true information and true stories that goes about the great writer Muhammad Tawfiq al-Hakim. Also about how the foreigners who lived in Egypt were great nationalists, especially the Greeks, for a mention, who really have given a lot to Egypt. Also, the fact that Egyptians have got a great sense of humor, and definitely how they fought their way through grievances and through times with great important concern of how to bring happiness in the times of sadness. Also, I think one of the beautiful parts of the book is going through pages that we didn't really find that it was easily found in the history of Egypt. For example, the number of people who were involved in crimes, for example, like Ryan Skina, and the famous slaughters and the famous things that happened in the history of Egypt is also definitely another important part of Mustafa Abeid's book, The Footnotes of History. So after the break, we'll go on more talking about this interesting book. So as we go through the pages of Mustafa Abeid, The Footnotes of History, there is a beautiful chapter that he was talking about Egyptian women. And as we know that the 8th of March is the National Day of Women, International Day of Women, celebrating women of substance. And yes, the Egyptian women have took their share in patriotism, in defending the country, in going into the revolution itself of 1919, in supporting the Egyptian army during different acts of war in 1956, in Port Said, and even the Egyptian ladies who insisted in enrolling in military training to defend Egypt after the British-French invasion. And also we cannot forget the role of the Egyptian women from 1967 till 1973 in defending Egypt, and in their role in Suez, how they were able, through their understanding, the women who stayed under siege were able to collect the food, make beautiful food, and use all the possible resources for support of the people who were under siege, and maintaining their integrity and their intellect in saving and supporting the Egyptian people. So this is one of the chapters that I find of great amusement and great understanding. Also the other chapter which talks about the sense of humor of Egyptians, and talking about especially how Egyptian artists and writers have got great sense of humor. But there is something that I beg to differ when he talked about Salama Musa, who was a famous socialist writer, and he said that in 1921 he has founded the Egyptian Communist Party, which I really do not think that this was true, because the Egyptian Communist Party was later formed in the late 30s, early 40s, and Salama Musa was not the founder of the Egyptian Communist Party. Another important point, which I believe is trying to summarize a lot of memoirs and diaries of Egyptian famous leaders. And he has started this by a beautiful footnote from Naguib Mahfouz. You know that Naguib Mahfouz started his life as a student of philosophy in the Faculty of Arts, Cairo University. And he's been always looking to Egypt and looking to the world in a philosophical way. And he said that the denial of facts does not change them. And this is the important introduction to how to look at different biographies. Every person, when he writes his own biography, will be very much giving a lot of compliments to himself. This is human nature. He would always try not to tell everything. And if he is going to talk about some secrets of his life, he is going to try to rationalize the mistakes that he has made, or try to deny the mistakes that he made, or try to give himself the best possible image. And Mustafa Abid went on discussing these in a different way. About, for example, the Memoirs of Arabi. And yes, Arabi is one of the Egyptian leaders who have been always treated in two different ways, nothing in the middle. After the revolution of Arabi and the occupation of Egypt, and Arabi being sent in exile, he was condemned to death, and then he was pardoned and to be sent to exile, and later on returned to Egypt just before his death in 1909, and died in 1914, 1911. So when we talk about Arabi, people at that time considered him to be the reason of the occupation, and considered him to be a failure, and definitely he was not liked by a lot of nationalists. Later on, after the 1952 revolution, Ahmad Arabi has been reborn again as a nationalist, as a liberal, and as a great leader. Well, we cannot say, this is how he, for example, has written in his memoirs about himself. So we cannot really take both opinions to be right. Arabi, we should take something in between. Maybe we'll reach the truth. And definitely when we talk about the Arabi Revolution, we have to say that Arabi himself was one of the leaders. There was a nationalist civilian movement that was on the rise in 1879, and should the British would not have been involved, definitely there would have been a great liberal movement in Egypt that was supported by the rising educated civilians who have learned and got a proper education during Muhammad Ali's reign and Ibrahim Pasha and later to be followed. So definitely the occupation is which was going to happen, whether we liked it or not, because this was the area or the era of the expansion of the British in Egypt, in the whole world. So they would have found a reason to invade Egypt. So Arabi was a defender, but with low or lacked the capabilities and the proper education to defend properly. Other footnotes or other biographies should be, we should give credit to one of the greatest writers of all them all. The most honest biographer was definitely Saad Zaghloul, who admitted all his mistakes in his life and was very clear and sharp in insulting himself or telling himself about the mistakes that he has made in his life, about his love, for example, for gambling and these things and losing his money. So we talk about a very respectful man through his biography. Of course, the biography of Muhammad Naguib is biased because he's giving himself the greatest possible virtue for everything, and talking about himself as a great democrat, while his short tenure he was not. And when we talk about the memoirs of Anwar Sadat or Shazli, we'll definitely have a lot of things to discuss. So I think the best thing to talk about biographies is that you should read different biographies from the different perspective, and the same perspective that you should have some skepticism of whatever the biographer is writing, because definitely he will try to clarify his name. So this is an interesting point by Mustafa Abeid in the Footnotes of History. I think we're coming to an end with the world of info for today and the world of books. And I think that we have mentioned or able to discuss rapidly 4 books that deserve to be read in late winter of Egypt. And these are In the Homes of the Loved Ones by Zainab Abdullah, Mustafa Abeid Against History, Mustafa Abeid again, The Footnotes of History, and Aizat al-Qamhawi, the Bushes in Joy and Sadness. So this was the world of info that came live from Radio Cairo in this beautiful afternoon in Thursday, coming live from Radio Cairo. My name is Dr. Amr MABROUK. Dua Muhammad was at the control. Stay tuned to Radio Cairo for more programs to come your way, and we hope that we'll see you the same time, same station, Radio Cairo, next week.